This is a piece of vellum offcut that I'd all but given up on. All bent up and curled. I felt like perhaps I could just cut a little piece out that would be usable, but it looked so bad, I'd just about given up on it. Then I decided, well, okay, if I'm going to more or less toss it away, I'll make a trial with it. And so I decided to do something I hadn't done before, and that was pretty much wet this down before I stretched it. I'll show you what I mean. This is how the piece of vellum looks from the hair side, a little darker, and this is what the vellum looks like from the flesh side. This shows what I'll need to stretch the vellum. This is a board foam core that's been taped to a very rigid piece of masonite. You can use plywood as well. And a regular office stapler. And then a little spray bottle that sprays out a very fine mist. This is what you'll need. The stapler opens up so that the jaws of it face flat onto the vellum. Most of the time when I'm going to try to get a piece of vellum to relax, I'll just barely spray a fine mist up in the air above it and let it settle down. And that relaxes the vellum enough to stretch it and staple it. However, this piece of vellum was in such bad shape, I had sprayed not directly on the vellum, but closer to it up into the air and made it not just damp but actually fairly moist, and that's something I hadn't done before. And after I made it nice and moist, then I took some weights and I stretched it and put weights on the four corners and let it dry temporarily. I let it dry until it was just damp to the touch, and then I went on to the next step. This is the position of the stapler, jaws opened up, if you will, so that it's flush onto the vellum, and you can press down and the vellum will then be stapled to the foam core. The next step was actually stapling the skin to the foam core. If you get pretty good at this, you'll be able to staple this about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the vellum. If you've ever changed a spare tire before, you know that with the lug nuts, when you put the tire back on, you tighten first one and then one opposite and then one and then opposite that. And that's what I do stapling the vellum. I staple down one edge with one staple and then I pull tightly in the other direction and staple it there, and I go back and forth doing that, doing one whole edge and then the other edge and then the other two edges in the same manner. You will wind up having to trim away the parts of the vellum that have the staples on them, so you're trying to be frugal as best you can. This is what it looks like after the vellum has been stretched and stapled, and now I'm going to let it dry overnight. Once it dries overnight, it will be almost as stiff as if it's been ironed and starched. It really did straighten out a lot. I find to pry away the staples from off the foam core, the blade of a Swiss Army knife is really nice. It's thin and wide and very rigid, and so it'll take the prying up of the staples really nice. Here's the whole skin of vellum, the whole offcut of vellum, with many of the staples pried away. When you get a good number of them pried away, you can, if the vellum is tough enough, actually pull from the underside of the vellum and it will start coming up in a line. You can see that that's what I've done in the lower right-hand corner. I've actually pried up a good number of the staples, and the vellum is sitting slightly above the foam core. Now, with a pair of sharp, clean scissors, you can be trimming away where the staples are still left in, where you've actually pried them away from the board and they're no longer attached. or you can trim away where you've removed all the staples. In any case, once again, you're trying to be very frugal and not waste too much of the vellum. So if everything works out well, if you've been able to staple down the edges about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the vellum, and now you're cutting about another 1/8 of an inch away, what you'll see is you've trimmed away about 1/4 of an inch of the vellum all the way around. So that in total, you've trimmed away 1/2 an inch away from the height of the full skin and 1/2 an inch away from the width of the full skin. And finally, you have a beautiful flat piece of vellum ready to sand down and use as if it were perfect from the start. All the trimmings are left above and tossed away. You've revived this piece of vellum that was once hardly worth looking at, hardly worth considering to use. Just to give a little perspective, if this were trimmed into a nice, neat rectangle, the usable part would be about 8 inches by 13 inches. A good day.